Hello, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to our webinar on cybersecurity and education with SOFTDOCS. My name is Athena Peterson, and I am Bugcrowd's Head of Customer Experience. Today, we're going to cover how SOFTDOCS manages their threat landscape. So let me first introduce you to our key speakers. So I'd like to introduce you to Mike Williamson. Mike,
Hello.
would you please give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, my name is Mike Williamson. I'm the VP of Research and Development for SOFTDOCS. I have been at SOFTDOCS for approximately 9 months now. Before, I spent most of my 30-year career in startup companies, but did spend the last 12 years at Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. I'm really enjoying my time at SOFTDOCS and really appreciate the security mindedness of the company and the technical talents of William and crew. So that's me.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce everybody to William. William, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm William SCALF, the security architect here at SOFTDOCS. I come from a startup background as well and have been with SOFTDOCS for most of my career now. It's been about 9 years. And I've been with eTrieve from the very beginning, guiding our design and coding practices to create the most secure software we can.
Thank you. Now let's learn a little bit more about who SOFTDOCS is. Mike, would you like to give us an overview?
Yeah, thanks, Athena. SOFTDOCS is an enterprise content management system. Our marketplace is very focused on the education market. So K through 12 schools and higher education is really, and I will say right now in the United States, is our focus. Enterprise content management is, some people know it very well, other people are not quite sure what that means. It's essentially document storage, document routing, workflow management, setting up approvals for documents. So if you think about a school system, a higher education institution, and think about the many processes that they have to do that have documents, we are a piece of software that enables them to automate much of those processes. So admissions, financial aid, transcripts, registrar, payment, those types of things where documents are routed. A request for a student to change classes they might go on their mobile phone and submit using eTrieve a request, who goes to the registrar, who might have to go to the professor for approval, things like that. And so that's what enterprise content management is the managing of all that. We are a smaller company. We have, though not a startup, we have about 700 higher education institutions in our portfolio. We are continually trying to improve our product and grow to get even bigger than that. So hopefully that was a good enough explanation of what SOFTDOCS does.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. So now let's look at a recap of what we're going to cover today. We are going to have William and Mike go over today's threat landscape within the education sector, what SOFTDOCS security approach is, and then take a deeper dive into their next generation penetration testing and close it out with the impacts that they have seen and best practices. So Mike and William, could either of you take a stab at defining what a threat landscape is?
Sure. Well, let me start a little bit, and then William, you can chime in. Any
Sure.
institution, any entity that has an online presence has to think about the attack surfaces that bad guys would get at. They could be applications that they're using. They could be people. Phishing is one of the most common attacks, and so that's part of the threat landscape. And so taking time as an institution and thinking through what that landscape looks like, where you're most vulnerable, is kind of what the landscape looks like.
Really, a threat landscape is a way of thinking about and talking about and really describing the kinds of threats your institution faces. And so there are a bunch of ways of thinking about this, different threat modeling strategies that we may touch on later But the idea is just understanding what are your actual threats, and they can be surprising.
Now, what about the threat landscape in education?
Yeah, so clearly, with some of the new things that have just recently happened, remote learning is exploding. And as a result, there are people in their homes that are students. Universities and K through 12 institutions need to think about how to protect data going across that from the data centers to their homes. The security risks are just completely increasing. I mean, just for everybody, it's increasing. I know William was telling me a little bit that it will not be far away where the profit that people make from hijacking data is more lucrative than the drug trade, which is an amazing, staggering number. And of course, all of the brand new features that Generation Z want. They want, integrated applications. They don't want to log in 6 times. They want it all to be kind of seamless like they're used to as they grew up with technology. Puts a huge burden on IT and trying to make sure all these things are integrated successfully well so that the students and faculty for that matter have a good experience, but yet it's secured and kept safe. And then the cloud, we think the cloud is magic, and the truth of the matter is the cloud is not magic. It needs to be done well and done thoughtfully. So that's my perspective. Well, William, what do you think?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned cybercrime versus the drug trade in terms of profitability. So I've seen a few different sources speak to that, kind of saying either it's already more profitable or it will be soon, and really both are difficult to gauge their profitability because they're very much things that operate in the dark. But yeah, it's remarkable that they are in fact comparable. So where cybercrime used to be in the domain of people who would, you know, be looking to demonstrate their technical chops or, bored or whatever, now it's very much in the domain of criminal syndicates. They're looking to make money any way they can. And schools, like any other organization where you have lots of people and lots of information, are subject to this. There are a bunch of ways that a criminal might profit off of a school's data. Anything from kind of the expected identity theft and fraud, if they can get access to the right sensitive information, to things that may be surprising, like trying to hijack student email accounts to use them to sign up for like student discounts and things, which, in turn, those can be sold for, less than the discount, and you can make money. And then kind of your really scary, often hypothetical attackers, like your nation state actors, where you have national governments and militaries involved in cybercrime. Those used to be kind of the example of why all of these different security measures are necessary, because these spooky bad actors might exist. Well, these days they absolutely do. And they're interested in things like intellectual property, research that universities are undertaking, and that sort of thing. And they absolutely would be willing to attack schools to try to get that information.
Yeah, William, do you see the cloud as kind of a solution, maybe an additional problem? What's your perspective?
It can be either, right? So there's a common joke that the cloud is just someone else's computer. And it's true, right? But that can go a couple different ways. So on the one hand, you have a lot less control over that other computer because it's not yours. And so where you could lock down your own infrastructure and put different security appliances in front of it and things, you don't usually have a lot of control over someone else's. And that can be scary because you don't know if they're securing it well unless, they tell you. And there can be ways to find out, what they do, asking them. Sometimes they'll publish disclosures and things, or they'll say they comply with certain standards and things. You can look up the standards. And then there's also a SOC standard where they have to publish their processes and things and be audited to be in compliance with those. So you have options like that to better understand what they're doing. But then on the other hand, where it can be really, really valuable is benefiting from economies of scale, where you can host in like a data center that has, already it's protected against natural disasters and physical tampering and things. And then especially if your provider is like a SaaS, a SaaS solution with many, many customers, they can afford to have a better operations center. They can afford to have very close monitoring and things like that that you may not be able to afford to do yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way they have a much higher ceiling as long as they hit it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where it comes back to auditing. What are they actually doing? How secure is your data? Because it may be better off, it may not.
Looking at the threat landscape in education, could you talk the audience through what SOFTDOCS approach is to security?
Yeah, I'll let William do this. He's really the architect of it. So go ahead, William.
Yeah, so it's really a whole life cycle, right? So we do a lot of threat modeling where we try to say, okay, what are the hypothetical threats that we would need to protect against, that all software needs to protect against? And for that, we would use something like STRIDE threat models versus what are the things that are education-specific threats? What are the sorts of things that our customers would be dealing with regularly versus what the hypothetical threats are? And the sorts of regular threats are still kind of the things that everyone faces, but you're looking at two different domains, I guess. So for our hypothetical threats that we would do kind of application security modeling for, those are essentially bugs that you're wanting to make sure that you don't have. And so making sure that malicious users aren't able to spoof data or tamper with data or plausibly deny that they did something they did. That's kind of what the STRIDE threat model is talking about. But then your everyday threats are typically more operational. So those are things like phishing or emailing an attachment with malware and ransomware, those sorts of things. And so when it comes to the threat models, we can do a lot about the application security because we're creating the software. And so that's really an area that we focus on that we really own. But then for the operational threats, we still think about them, but they are more of our customers' responsibility. But there are things that we can do, like we integrate very deeply with single sign-on solutions. So if your single sign-on provider has multi-factor authentication, then we have multi-factor authentication. And that can help a lot with phishing and that sort of thing. So once we know the threats that we're trying to trying to deal with, trying to protect against, that can kind of feed into developer education. And so we're able to work with our developers, and I'm also one of our developers. I live in both camps. To make sure that we're designing and programming our software to be as secure as we reasonably can. And that's an ongoing process that we feed into both from the threat models and from real vulnerabilities. So whenever we discover vulnerabilities, which we will be talking about later on, that helps us expose gaps in our development process that we can fill with education. And then code reviews are kind of our opportunity to check our work from the education phase. So whenever our software is being developed, being expanded, when we're working on bugs, we're checking each other's work. And especially people from my security camp would be looking for developers who aren't following the current standards. And so we're hopefully able to catch things very early on and then have very targeted education to keep people on track. And we haven't had to do much of that, but it still is a way to verify that that education is working. And then we have automated testing. We have lots of unit tests and integration tests that we build around the software so that we can execute those almost like an executable specification that says that the software does these things and does not do these things. And we're able to prove that repeatably and very quickly. And then we also have real, like, full-on penetration testing, both in-house and crowdsourced. So in-house, we have some QA, like testing people who double as penetration testers. We also have some dedicated penetration testers, and really try to work testing our threat model against our software into our software verification process. But then we also open up our latest software to a crowd, um, which is where Bugcrowd is giving us access to all these ethical hackers who can then turn around and penetration test the software for us as well, so that we're able to get their feedback on top of our own internal feedback. And so each step is really verifying that the previous steps didn't miss something.
Thank you. So I actually wanted to ask a question. I'd like to focus a little bit more on the multifaceted approach to penetration testing. William, could you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that you guys have seen, or that are industry standard challenges or industry specific challenges with in-house penetration testing?
So our biggest challenge has been the amount of effort involved. We have a lot of stuff to do. We have a fairly large attack surface. We have very sophisticated software. And so you could just test continuously and you wouldn't keep up with the code churn. And we're not that large of a company. And so investing in enough dedicated penetration testers to constantly test our software would be really just untenable. And even then, you're still getting only that cohort of people's opinions and experience, which really isn't that diverse. So, because it's only going to be, however many people. So we've tried some things like automated penetration testing solutions to augment that so that we get more coverage more quickly. And none of those really panned out for us. They weren't able to really exercise our web APIs. And so we ended up saying, all right, well, what we would do is bring on a crowd. And that way we kind of get the best of both worlds, because the benefit really from in-house penetration testing is they're people who know the software, they're people who work with us, they attend our stand-ups, and we're able to work very closely with them. They can look at the code and get really effective testing done, but with somewhat limited time, and then also limited experience. But then the benefit we get from the crowd is we're really just paying for results. We're not paying for the time they spent. We're paying for the bugs they found that our internal penetration testers did not find. And we're also getting literally hundreds of people with different backgrounds, different specialties. And so they're able to come at the software from angles that we never would have predicted. But then the disadvantage is they don't know the software as well. So they may report normal behavior as a bug because they didn't understand the behavior. They may not know how to use a feature. And we do give them access to manuals, but there's a lot of functionality. And so there can be some challenges there, but it's almost like a scalpel versus a hammer. And it's valuable to have both happening at the same time. And so as far as risks associated with penetration testing, there's always some chance that somebody will find something and not tell you. Now, to our knowledge, that hasn't happened. And the people we have in-house, of course, are people we know, people we trust. And people from the crowd are people that Bugcrowd has vetted and background checked and trust. But there is always some possibility that something could be disclosed that shouldn't be. So that's something that we're concerned about, but not terribly, again, because things are very well vetted. And so far, we've had really good results. There is also the chance, if you're penetration testing a live software solution, that penetration testers could take it down by accident. That has happened to us in our test environment, but it's separate from our production environments, so that doesn't affect our customers. But if we didn't have that separation, that would be a risk as well.
Thank you so much, William. Now, would you mind walking us through specific program results from your next generation penetration testing or your crowdsourced penetration testing program?
So we can't talk about any specific findings. While we have addressed the findings that have been reported to us, not all of our customers are upgraded, and so existing customers could be still affected by some findings, even though they've been fixed in the latest software. But we can talk a little bit about the trend. So you might notice that we had a general upward trend there. So as it mentions on the left here, we had started with a kind of general crowd and just kind of invited whoever would come, and there were findings. And we were, they exposed a gap in our development process that we're aware of and we're working on. And those specific findings are addressed. And as talked about in the earlier slide, we have a process for making these sorts of course corrections so we don't have those problems anymore. So that's been very beneficial to us. And the reason the graph is trending upward, we think, is that over time we introduced some new applications to the crowd and found that we needed more specialized researchers than we initially had access to. And so once we started changing who was in our crowd, they started having more and higher impact findings.
Yeah, and that's what the graph shows. And but from my perspective as a VP, the relationship we have with Bugcrowd and the understanding that continually as we release new versions, right now we're on a every other month cadence where we release new software. We release that, and then the crowd can kind of take a crack at it, and it gives us added comfort. It isn't, nobody pretends that it's bulletproof or anything like that, but the idea that white hat trusted hackers are really looking through the code that we've just released to a set of customers and trying to find holes in it is really very comforting. And we do that ourselves, but you know, the world is dangerous and we want to be really, really good at taking care of our customers. So Bugcrowd provides kind of a safety net in a lot of ways. William and his team does a great job, but this process and our relationship with Bugcrowd really is a nice kind of blend of what we're looking for.
Oh yeah, and it's huge. It really is. So I don't mean to undersell that. So we have they exposed a gap in our process, which is hugely valuable for two different reasons. One is that we're able to address it, and that's big because we may not have known that we had that blind spot had these researchers not pointed it out to us. But then also, it's a small one, and we have kind of, it's almost like we're simulating a hostile environment with friendly people because you have, as I mentioned earlier, hundreds of people with different backgrounds and skill sets that are all trying their own tricks and things, just like the bad guys would. They would also come from different backgrounds and have different skill sets and have their own tricks that they try. And seeing that we don't have the common vulnerabilities, or at least that we don't appear to, because we were able to design for them, and where we had gaps before, we addressed them and they haven't come back. That's huge. And right now we have a few areas that we need to work on, and we are. And so we're going to come back even stronger and be able to keep continually refining using this process.
That's great. Could you actually dig in a little bit deeper into why crowdsourced security really does make sense for education?
Yeah, thanks. Education is a hotbed of information. I mean, the research that's done there to the sheer quantity and volume of data that are stored in their systems is it's just ripe for people to attack. And so their threat landscape, so to speak, is huge. And yet their budgets, even the large universities, their budgets are strapped. They're trying to keep their campuses going. They're dealing with online things, and so they have the same issues we have. You know, they have they have a large attack surface. Their IT departments are not huge. You know, so the Big Ten schools or the SEC schools perhaps have a fairly large IT department, but they're mostly building software, and so access in the same way that to penetration testers and, you know, paying that salary and, or, you know, paying some high priced firm to come and do it once a year, it's just hard for them to do that. And then many universities are small. They're 4,000 students or 8,000 or 12,000 students, and their IT department is is a whole different story. And so what they can do using a crowdsourced solution like Bugcrowd is the same thing we did. Is they can get people that are, first of all, if they can sit down and just talk about it, and it doesn't have to be weeks and weeks and weeks of talking about it, but just sit down and think through, you know, a threat landscape and engage, you know, folks like Bugcrowd. Then the access to the talent that really are very effective at doing the penetration testing for those universities is a great resource, because then you pay for bugs being found, not necessarily for the time spent, and that's a great cost benefit. I mean, it just really is. And so universities might be in a great place for that. And then it's perpetual. Next generation pen testing means essentially it's continually done. So it's not done, it's you know, once a year, you know, we're going to penetration test your site on August, the weekend, third weekend in August. It's you know, all the time. So if, you know, something happens during a code change or an implementation of a firewall, well, the next week people are still testing, and they're just keep doing it. So that's really helpful for a university, that continuous coverage. The other thing about education is it's a collaborative environment. The idea that it's an interesting and really delightful market, because they're competitors for students. They're competitors to figure out the biggest problem in physics or chemistry, or to write the great, you know, story or research paper or whatever. But they're also collaborative. They're, you know, Carnegie Mellon and MIT will work together on this joint project, and that's not how industry works. And so this Bugcrowd kind of collaboration with these white hat good guy or trusted penetration testers really is very education like. And so their comfort level with that kind of collaboration, I think, is going to be higher than maybe another industry that's much more, you know, everything stays in these walls and we don't share anything with our competitors. Education just is not that way, and I just think it's a great solution for many of our customers.
Now let's move on to outcomes. I know, William, you've touched on this a little bit, but let's really look at what have been the biggest benefits from your next-gen penetration test program? And then how does penetration testing overall impact your customers?
All right, so the biggest benefits we've seen are really just uncovering blind spots. So it's pretty likely, no matter who you are and no matter how secure your development process is, you probably have focus areas and you probably have blind spots and things that you just aren't aware of. And so by getting lots of different perspectives and lots of different people poking at it, they're able to find things that you didn't consider. And that's huge, because then you can add that to your process, you can take it into account in the future and grow as a developer, as a department, as a company. And then as far as how penetration testing impacts our customers, I would joke as little as possible. But no, like, it actually does matter. So on the reason I would make that joke is that we do make sure to separate the infrastructure where we do the penetration testing so that that doesn't affect customers. They won't be taken down or have slowness or have researchers accidentally viewing their data. That's all very carefully separated. But what it does do for our customers is it allows us to provide them a more secure product that we can be more confident in, and that they can be more confident in as well.
Yeah, and Yeah, this is Mike. And so our customers have come to rely on us. And again, no software is completely secure. There's ways but our customers have come to trust us with that. The other thing that we feel like is our cloud implementation helps a lot, because not only do we test our software, but when we put it in our infrastructure, in our cloud, we take over a lot of the operational aspects of running eTrieve for each of our customers. And so the diligence with which we do that testing, our pen testers and the next generation pen testers are looking at our cloud infrastructure as well and saying, hey, well, while they're attacking the application, you've deployed it in this manner, and as a result, there's a hole, and so that helps us improve our cloud platform. And so while we still offer an on-prem solution, we are really driving hard towards getting our customers to move to the cloud, because we think that's helpful for, that just takes that load off. It's like they can trust that we've got that, and they can work on taking care of their students and taking care of their faculty, and they're not necessarily having to worry so much about eTrieve and SOFTDOCS software, not just the application itself, but the infrastructure that it runs on. So that's, I think, probably the biggest way in which it impacts our customers.
That's great. Thank you. Now, still focusing on, your customers, what tips would you have for others within the education security space on how to be successful with this and how to really be secure?
Yeah, so let me start, and then William, I think you can close this out, because I think you probably have much more detail. As a VP of Research and Development, define your threat landscape, and that does not have to be a team of people that you dedicate 6 months to. It's thoughtful conversation with the right people in the room. It's probably not one conversation, but maybe 3 or 4. It probably could happen once every 6 months, but you basically work at that. It doesn't take too much time, but just even thinking about it for a little while gives you problems to solve and thoughtfulness about where to pay attention. For example, phishing is nearly the biggest thing. It is the largest kind of way that people get into your system. And so what at your university or what at your company can you do to help that? And how can you measure that? That's something that's, if you just stop for a minute and think about that, and then put a program together to address that, that helps a great deal. And then understand your cloud. Make sure that the vendors that you have that have cloud solutions, make sure you understand how they implement it. Ask some good questions of your vendors. What is their cloud infrastructure? How do they manage it? How do they, if there's a vulnerability found, how do they fix it? Ask questions like that. Those are good questions for you to ask all of your cloud vendors. And then defense in depth is almost a course. I mean, in fact, it is a course. It's probably a master's level course at most of our universities. But the idea is, there's not one-stop shopping for security. You've got to have lots of different layers and lots of different thoughts about how to do it. So if you think you've bought this vendor and you're now secure, stop for a minute and think a little bit more, and just realize that there are different levels of defense that you must do, not only with individuals and people, your employees and your students, but also your firewalls and your applications. Those are big things. So William, I'll let you take a pass at this too, because I think you've got a little bit more technical understanding of these things too.
Oh, sure. Though I love the way you explained it. It pretty well covers the topic. So yeah, so defining the threat landscape, as we talked about earlier, that's really important, because you can try to defend against everything, but then you still have to define what is everything. And it also would make it difficult to prioritize the things that you're most likely to face. So by getting together, talking about what your threats actually are, what resources you have that, you have threats against. It's really risk management as a concept. And that can include lots of things, not just bad actors, but also natural disasters. This virus we have going on now is a threat actor. And understanding what sorts of effects it can have on your organization, and what not only what you can do to control for those, but what you should do, and kind of figuring out what the appropriate controls are. That's really risk management as a concept, and defining what your threats are is the beginning of that process. And then understanding the cloud is, yeah, like we were talking about earlier, it's just someone else's computer. So what benefits are you getting from a specific cloud implementation, and what concerns do you have? And what, can your vendor help with your concerns? And how does that mesh with your threat landscape? Are you more protected using a specific cloud vendor or not? And you certainly can be, but it depends on what they're doing. And then for defense in depth, so when you're talking about SaaS software, you've mostly offloaded your defense layers to your vendor. And so at that point, choosing a reputable vendor is really the most important thing you can do. But you still can train your employees on reasonable risk mitigation strategies when they're using their computer, from the super obvious things like don't open attachments that you aren't expecting, to more elaborate anti-phishing campaigns and that sort of thing, depending on what's appropriate for your organization. And that brings us back to the threat landscape, because working through that and talking about that is really how you have a starting point to decide what is appropriate to address these other concerns.
Well, that wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you both to our speakers and viewers, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.